I am Jay Rosenthal with Cultivated. This is Cultivated Live. We are live at Planet 13 in Las Vegas. Good morning. We're with Bryan and Rob. We're going to talk about US Cannabis Council stuff. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Bryan, we've met before. Where'd you get the hat?
I got the hat from you, Jay.
Oh, good. Looks good.
Yeah, it's a cool endeavor. No, we're really excited to be here and talk about Cultivated News, and just want to give a big shout out to Jay too, who's awesome member of Team Dutchie, and excited for him to be taking on this new adventure too.
What's great, I have Dutchie hats too, just not.
Don't wear them.
Just not right behind me. Just not right behind me. Every conversation we've had right now, and probably every single one we will have over the next 2.5 days, something about DC is going to come up. Do you have news to share with us? Timing? Do you want to break news here about safe banking passing the Senate at some point?
Well, one thing we're working on is making sure that we're not breaking as much news on podcasts as the industry's done in years past.
Good.
Blanket Twitter Spaces ban for the rest of the year.
What is the latest? Well, let's start actually not with safe, but with rescheduling.
Sure.
Yeah. Tell us.
Well, as you probably know, in addition to the US Cannabis Council, both Rob and I are intimately involved in the Coalition for Cannabis Scheduling Reform, CCSR, and we're working really closely with a number of consultants and folks who are close with the Biden administration. We feel pretty damn confident that we're headed towards a Schedule 3 decision. Obviously, the DEA still has some work to do, and that's nothing's final until they put something forward. But we think that's very likely to happen, and we think it's very likely to happen before the election. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that President Biden called for this and would probably like to run on it for re-election, and so we're hoping that the timing works out so that he gets to do that, and we think he is too.
I like that.
For the skeptics or the cynics among us,
Jeremy.
yeah, like
guess that's your
myself,
job, right?
Where does the confidence come from?
Look, I would say while the duck does not appear to be moving on the surface right now, it is furiously kicking beneath.
Okay.
And I also
like
think not a ton of news right now is probably good. It means things are happening in due course, and the process is we believe playing out the way that it should. HHS came back probably earlier than we expected, even with their recommendation to Schedule 3, and that obviously kicks off the next portion of the process, which is the DEA review. It would certainly. I don't know that the HHS would have made that recommendation had they not been relatively confident that the DEA would follow suit. Obviously, can't say that with 100% certainty, but I think it would be surprising.
And I would just say, I think the confidence comes in large part from the deep connections that many of the folks in our coalition have with decision makers in Washington. And just to put a plug in, I'll say if there are folks who are interested in joining, it's a large coalition.
Yep.
It's, includes nonprofit social equity organizations, as well as companies. And so, if you're part of the coalition, you certainly have access to the sort of intel, and there are specifics to be had.
Let me put you on the spot for a second.
Sure.
On that question. Like, how big of a tent do you want in the coalition? Because there are a lot of social equity people who have opinions about rescheduling and what it's good for, what it's bad for. So,
well, I'd say it's a pretty big tent to start with, and we're interested in continuing to bring more folks involved from various stakeholders in the industry, not just companies themselves. But I'd also say that we do see rescheduling as a path towards descheduling. I mean, it's not the rescheduling is not the end all be all. Yeah. In order to get to descheduling, you're going to need to get DC comfortable with it, and that means more research. That means just seeing that the world didn't end when cannabis got rescheduled, and that means that we're going to be able to push further once if and when rescheduling does happen. So we certainly don't see this as the end point once rescheduling happens. We do want to push further.
Yeah, and as someone who has followed and worked in politics for a very long time, I think it's a truism that the first thing is never the whole thing. And so getting these first steps towards reform is really critical to having eventual full normalization and descheduling. And frankly, like, our coalition is very broad. We have people who feel much more strongly that they wish it was a descheduling decision right now and may feel a little disappointed. But what the coalition is all coming together around is this is the minimum that needs to be done right now. And, some folks think this is a great first step. Some folks think it's not enough, but still good. And so the tent's big enough for all those folks. We have social equity operations like the Weldon Project and Justice Foundation and lots of other groups that, come from a wide spectrum of views on this. And, we welcome them all.
Can I ask a political question? When states like Ohio vote overwhelmingly, really, to have adult use programs like they did a couple weeks ago, what impact does that have on folks in DC that maybe not as far along? Like, are they like, oh shit, like our voters are here and we are here, we need to bridge that gap?
Yeah, Jay, I think you've heard me say this before, but I think people expect that politicians are leaders, and while they are in some ways, like the reality is most politicians are followers of the public will, right? And this is an area where, on cannabis, it's been a particularly taboo subject, and it's taken them a lot longer to come around to where the public will is. But I think the two big standout points in my mind that DC has been paying attention to in the past few months are the overwhelming vote in Ohio and the first Gallup poll that showed 70% public support across every major demographic, across conservatives, Republicans, every way you could break down people. It had majority support, and I think people are paying attention to that.
It's interesting because it came up in our last conversation with Jason, who's based in Minnesota, but we were talking about Wisconsin, and he was just visiting the Wisconsin legislature, talking about the medical cannabis program there, and very little resistance. Like, okay, let's get it done because we have competitive states, but also like the resistance that used to be, I think, immediate is actually good. Well, how do we get it done and make this incremental as opposed to like have voters throw it down on us?
And one thing I'd mention there is that every time a state flips, that's two more senators whose constituents are now part of a legal cannabis program, and X number of congressmen depending on the state. And I think that's actually something that USCC has started to do a significantly better job of is mapping who is representing us and based on where our facilities are, dispensaries, our cultivations, and being able to go into the offices and saying, you represent us. This isn't just a monolithic industry here that's coming in. Like, you're our actual representative.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that is powerful. It creates a connection and a there that may not exist otherwise. And every time a new state flips, it just gives you more opportunity to have that more intimate level discussion with somebody who's representing you.
And I would say in some of these red and reddish purple states, right, you have a strong case to be made that there's a pro-business, pro-liberty argument for supporting these businesses. For, when we talk about something like 280E reform, you're talking about a tax that was never meant to apply to state legal businesses where they're paying an effective tax rate in some cases in north of 80%. I don't know how you could be a principled conservative Republican and say that that's a fair way to go about your business. So hopefully there's a strong message that resonates from states like Ohio for those legislators.
How do you have that argument with maybe some conservative senators who just are against legalization in the first place? Like the pro-business, the states' rights, like all this thing makes sense to me, but how do you even begin the conversation?
I think there's certainly an educational approach to it. I do think some of the prohibitionists view 280E repeal as a tax cut and a tax break, and you have to lay out the facts and show I think you mentioned what the effective tax rates are north of 80% at times, and say, no, this is fair taxation here. We're just looking to get to par with the rest of the world, and I think that actually does have a powerful effect on some folks because they get to look at it through a slightly different lens.
Yeah. And I would say part of it too is just having the right messengers, right? Like having a company with national presence that doesn't have a large footprint in that state and going to a conservative senator and saying like, our industry's great, like probably not the right approach. But as we map out, you bring in a small business, that's in someone's district to talk about what they're facing as a business owner. They may not agree with the principle, but they're still going to meet with the business owner from their district. Or us as a technology provider and compliance company, we talk about, how the illicit market works versus the controlled market and how we make sure people are properly licensed and that they are operating within a compliant scheme where they're not selling to kids, where they're not able to get access to products that are going to put someone in the hospital, that can really resonate with them.
It's interesting. Before the first person that came on, we were talking about Planet 13, and he was saying, it's not an argument necessarily for Nevada folks, but others. Like he was saying there's like 550 employees related to Planet 13 in Nevada.
Yeah.
In Las Vegas itself. Like, it's a huge number, especially in smaller states or more rural states. Like, that's a massive number. It's a big operation for sure, but like, those jobs are real. And I just think about in Canadian landscape, like, Organigram is the largest private employer in Moncton, New Brunswick. They have enormous sway.
Is that right?
Yeah. There's like almost 800 employees total, like whatever it is. Like, that's a huge private employer in small towns, and they have enormous sway. That's on the local and maybe provincial level, but in the states too, like some of those conservative states, think about South Dakota. If they had a real cannabis operator that was huge, it'd be a major employer.
It is a major employer. The jobs are huge, and I will tell you, the federal government has started to, even while policy hasn't moved, the administration, different departments have started to move because they've had to. And one of those places is the census recently announced this past year that they're now tracking cannabis jobs as a specific category. And I do think that's an important step for legitimacy, because if you are a gun trafficker or a heroin smuggler, they don't put that on the census, right? Like, if they put it on the census, they recognize it's a legitimate industry.
Yeah, that's like the
That'd be
precursor.
spicy.
Yeah, but thinking about that, and I don't want to get too much into sort of the day-to-day of sort of what Dutchie does, but like that classification of the type of job, I don't know what that relationship is to like the type of payments you could take. Like, there's categories of the categories of business in which people are operating are well defined for tax purposes, for payment purposes. Like, at some point there's going to sync up these types of businesses, so you don't have to pretend you're this to get that. Like, it's...
You would hope so, and a lot of that is driven by national standards organizations, and
Right.
so more and more of them are starting to recognize. I mean, even like things like national weights and measures, is starting to weigh in on things about cannabis. And
Starting to weigh in. I like what you did there.
Yeah.
It's a good pun.
There you go.
It's a good pun.
What are they weighing in on? Out of
Like,
curiosity.
how much is in an ounce?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. I don't know.
Just like starting to have standards around weights and equivalencies and stuff like that.
Yeah, some states look at dry weight still, some look at wet weight. It's
Yeah.
I
Interesting.
know dry weight versus wet weight's been a big debate in Florida lately as well.
Huh.
Yeah.
Like, so standardization across,
Yeah.
like gasoline, kind of. I mean, that's a slightly different, but when you get to gas,
Yeah,
it's
no,
like,
I
it actually says
I can
exactly
absolutely see your
right.
point.
like a
there.
gallon is
Yeah.
a gallon is a
Yeah,
gallon.
you know what you're looking at, and you don't have to parse it as much. Reading the COA to determine what is this measurement versus this one that you may see in a different state. Absolutely.
That's a fun story idea. What bureaucrat is sitting there? Like, should it be wet? Should it be dry? Yeah.
Well, it's not dissimilar to something Jeremy wrote today, actually, about standardized lab testing,
Yeah.
right? Which is an industry challenge, but eventually
Yeah.
it may not be an industry challenge. It actually might be a mandate.
Yeah. Well, and another one actually
Yeah.
that has nothing to do with laws, but is really impactful for criminal justice is the U.S. Sentencing Commission. Which weighs in on what types of sentences are recommended for things revolving around cannabis, and that's another area where we're seeing progress.
See? Even the pessimists have something to find.
I'm a pessimist. I'm a skeptic. Yeah. No, I'm kidding.
I didn't mean to call you a pessimist. I meant a skeptic.
You can say it. It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, skeptics is Bryan is going to wear it. That's what the next shirt's going to say.
Cultivated, not skeptic. Yeah.
Rob and Bryan, I appreciate you making time during this very busy time for both of you.
Thank you.
Enjoy the conversation. Thank you for the work you're doing in DC and in your other lives as well. Thanks for coming by Planet 13. There's something you can exit through the gift shop.
Well, we'll be back in DC next week, and looking forward to continuing to fight for the industry.
Amazing. Rob, Bryan, thank you so much. We'll be right back from Planet 13 for Cultivated Live. We're going to be with John Prentice from Joint Craft. The company's name is new, so I wanted to make sure I got it right. Last word.
Yeah, last word. I got to say, love the new Cultivated News newsletter. Everyone should subscribe. Got to put in a plug for you guys.
Yeah, congratulations, guys. We're
Thank you.
really pumped for you.
Appreciate it.
Thank
You can
you.
get a hat too. Don't worry, Rob.
That's why I said that.
We paid them
We'll
to
be
say
right
that.
back.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.